Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Engaging Your Board in Equity-Centered Fundraising. My name is Yvonne Sims, Network Engagement Manager for Candid, based in Atlanta, and I'm joined by Ebony Carroll, Network Engagement Assistant, also based in Atlanta. We'll be supporting today's webinar behind the scenes, as well as collecting questions you ask along the way and posing them during the Q&A. For those of you joining us for the first time, we want to share with you that we joined forces with GuideStar to form a single new organization called Candid. Together, we have over 88 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. We believe that an effective social sector is critical for a thriving society, and we believe in the importance of solutions for the sector, by the sector. With Candid, nonprofits, foundations, donors, and the public can all be on the same page. Through research, collaboration, and training, Candid connects the people who want to change the world with the resources they need to do it. And now I'd like to turn the controls over to our speaker for today, Christal Cherry. And while I do that, I will tell you a little bit more about Christal. Christal is a nationally accomplished, recognized fundraiser who has spent 20 years working with nonprofits and higher education institutions. With passion and a wide breadth of experience, Christal works today with nonprofits to help them create effective and successful boards. At the Board Pro, Christal offers one-on-one board coaching, governance, and fundraising training at board meetings and retreats. Board clients have included United Way of Bartow County, the Rutledge Center, Girls Going Global, Tapestry Inc., and Children of Conservation. And I know Christal from her great work with the fabulous female fundraisers. She does a whole lot, including speaking for Candid, and I'm so glad she's with us again today. And I will turn it over to her.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Christal Cherry. Today is Engaging Your Board in Equity-Centered Fundraising, and this is one of my favorite topics, and so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, I'd like to start my webinars by introducing myself. My name is Christal Cherry, and as you can see here, I have a big wide smile and lots of dimples, and I try to be joyful all of the time. I usually like to start my presentations by sharing a little bit about me. So when I say something that also applies to you, please give me a high five or a like or a chat or something in the chat. That's me as well. I am a trained fundraiser, 23 years in the nonprofit industry. Been working for nonprofits and higher ed institutions. I worked for faith-based organizations. And then I also served as a consultant, a fundraising consultant for a while before I decided to hang out my shingle and become the board pro. I'm also a mompreneur, which just means I'm a kick-ass mom while being an entrepreneur. I'm also a volunteer. I make sure that my son and I get to volunteer at least once a year. I'm a native New Yorker, so you're going to hear that New York accent come out every once in a while, although I've been away from New York for about 30 years. It's still in there, Yvonne. I can't get rid of it. So you're going to hear that come out. I'm also a breakfast lover, so if you're a breakfast lover as well, high five to you. I just had my coffee and eggs, and might have some more before the day is out. I'm a news junkie. I love to find out what's going on in the world, not sitcoms anymore, Yvonne. I've gotten old now, so I just want to watch the news. I'm the oldest sibling of now 5 siblings. I'm the oldest girl. I'm a Leo born in August, so any Leos on the line, high five to you. And I'm also excited to share that I'm a new author. So last year in November, I authored a book, Mac and Cheese Being Different is Okay. It's about to celebrate its 1-year anniversary. I'm so excited. Whoop, whoop. And I wrote this book for children. Last year, we were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was working with a lot of board members on this topic, and I know that they were befuddled and confused and trying to figure it out. And I thought, what are our children thinking? And so I thought, well, I'm going to write a little tale about this and give parents and daycare providers and teachers an opportunity to talk to their kids about this very tough topic. So if you're interested, this is a wonderful Christmas gift. Visit my website at macandcheese.com. You can also buy the book on amazon.com for $12.99. So that's my shameless plug. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into our presentation for today. So fundraising is action, right? Fundraising is bold, and it means that you have to actively seek resources for your community. You have to actually get up and get out of your office, out of your chair, and boldly seek financial resources to address a community need. Money is raised, money is not raised, individual give it, which means that you have to actually ask someone for something. Money is not offered, one must ask for it. And then money does not just come in, someone must go get it. So I say that because I know a lot of times, as fundraisers, we think it's just, writing a grant, submitting the application, sending an email to someone, maybe, leaving a phone message. No, we have to be active if we're going to be raising money. We have to be proactive, we have to be bold, we have to ask for it, and we have to go get it. So fundraising is action. So I thought I would share some statistics. Many of you who are fundraisers in the room probably have seen this before. This is Giving USA statistics from 2021. $471 billion raised in 2020. That is $1.29 billion per day. A lot of money raised. We contribute almost 6% to the GDP every year. And individuals are still the largest source of contributions for fundraising. So I love it when I tell someone I'm a fundraiser and they say, oh, we need to write grants, or we need to get money from Chick-fil-A or Coca-Cola. And what they don't know is that corporate giving is shrinking, and nearly half of corporate giving is in kind. And nearly half of giving from foundations are family foundations. So while people think fundraising, they think we should go write grants or we should go ask companies, it really is still individuals who's the largest source making contributions to our nonprofits. And also we found out that faith and religious-based organizations are still leading the way at 28%, followed by education and grant-making foundations. And in case you didn't know, there are 1.4 million nonprofits in the United States. That's quite a few nonprofits, and that means we have 1.4 million nonprofit boards. In fact, 64 million board members making decisions about who lives and dies in our country. And I say that boldly, right? Fundraising success in uncertain times. And we should know that even during this time of uncertainty, with the economy kind of being erratic and with the political situation being erratic, that we can still be successful. But there's some things we have to do in order for us to make that happen. We have to be transparent with our donors about whatever challenges we might be experiencing, and just let them know we have some steps in place to address those challenges, right? We have to clearly articulate the impacts of the gifts that people are making to our organization, particularly now when funds are tight for some donors, knowing that my little $50 I sent in is going to help change someone's life will make a world of difference to me and give me some motivation to give again. If you want to fundraise in uncertain times, you want to make sure there are lots of giving options so that I can give cash, I can make monthly donations, I can make a deferred gift, giving plans. And we should know that donors who have means, who are very wealthy, most of their assets are not cash, right? Most of their assets are tied up in other things, stocks and bonds or cryptocurrency. And so these days, we really want to have all kinds of giving options for folks who don't necessarily want to pay cash, but they have a lot of stock they want to give, or cryptocurrency, or they may have a house or a car or something that's worth a lot of money. We want to make sure that we have a lot of giving options for those donors. So I also want to share that we should not cancel our fundraising plans. A lot of folks during the pandemic, everybody just kind of froze and was like, let's not really ask anybody for any money. Let's just sit still, or let's fire our whole fundraising team, which I thought was a complete mistake. I had so many friends who were laid off in the last 2 or 3 years. We know that, some people had to adjust and make changes to their campaign plans, but please don't cancel them, and don't fire your fundraising team. You guys need us. So just some things we need to keep in mind as we continue to fundraise in uncertain times. So there's some things that we should do. There's some key steps that we should take. We need to evaluate what's going on in the economy, focusing on the relationship between our donors' assets and the market trends, right? We need to differentiate expectations by remaining optimistic about high-level prospective donors, while recognizing that some mid-level donors may plateau or decline. And we know from 2020 that the small donor came in big, Yvonne. Those who gave $250 or less came in big during 2020. In fact, they surpassed major gifts of $1,000 or more. And it was those small donors who contributed to that $471 billion that I told you guys were raised earlier. So don't sleep on the small donor. Don't sleep on the $50 donation. We know a lot of them put together will bring in a lot of money. In fact, we saw the return of Libunts and Cybunts, which are donors who have lapsed, those who've lapsed in the last year or who've lapsed some year in the past. They came back during the pandemic. And we can't make assumptions that because we feel some way about what's happening in our economy, that other people won't give. So we can't make blanket assumptions that because there's a recession and because the gas prices are high and because food prices are high, that people won't give. So I know some people are saying that's insensitive to ask during a recession. Everybody's situation is different. There are some folks who are making a lot of money right now. There's some folks who are doing well right now, and we shouldn't assume that because there's a recession that everybody can't give. And my thing is, if you ask and they can't give, they can't give. But if you don't ask, you won't get it all. So don't make assumptions. And then also think about your organization and how it fared in the past when we had some difficult and challenging times. What happened in 2008 when we had the recession then? And what happened in 2020? How did your organization fare? So you know you had to make some adjustments, and just keep those in mind as we continue to try to navigate during these crazy times. As I mentioned, individuals are still the biggest source of giving for nonprofits. And so the problem with individuals is that it takes a minute for us to cultivate relationships with them. And sometimes our CEOs and our boards are not patient enough for us to develop those relationships. And we know that 3 out of 4 nonprofits view individual donations as essential for their work, particularly the smaller organizations that have budgets of $5,000, $500,000 or less. They really rely on individuals to donate. And we know that organizations during 2020 experienced quite a bit of loss and had to lay off quite a bit of their staff. So we know that happened, but individuals will stay with you and they will be loyal if you cultivate those relationships with them. And we're going to talk a little bit about stewardship and cultivation in a little bit. So again, what I was sharing with you guys earlier about the pandemic is what we've learned is that the small donor came in big, right? As I shared with you, they surpassed $1,000 gifts or more. The $250 gifts came in huge and surpassed $1,000 donations. And across the board, donors came together during crisis and gave big time to our organization. So again, don't sleep on the small gift. Don't sleep on the gift from individuals. Don't delete all of your lapsed and side butt donors out of your database, because they will come back in times of crisis. And if they did come back, now is a time for you to re-engage. Now is a time for you to grab them back, and hopefully they won't go far again. They won't go astray again. If you had some donor in your database who went away after 3 years and then they've resurfaced during the pandemic, you should be making phone calls. You should be checking in with them, making sure they're on your Facebook page, getting the newsletter, do everything. I mean, go hard in engaging them so that now you have their attention again. You can keep those relationships hopefully going forever and ever. So anyway, we talk about generational fundraising, and while there are lots of generations that in the workplace now, we have 5 generations in the workplace. That means 5 generations who can give. Boomers, that would be me, 1964 and after, we still control the money in this country, right? According to a 2015 U.S. News and World Report, baby boomers control 70% of disposable income. And so the older generations like mine, baby boomers and the silent generation, are more likely to prioritize emergency relief, nonprofits, while younger generations seem to like children's charities, and Gen X and Gen Z seem to like animal-related causes. So just some information, little tidbit information about generational fundraising. I thought I would throw that in here. So I want to talk a little bit about fundraising with a different lens, right? So the other day, someone asked me, what does the future of fundraising mean? What does it look like? And so the future of fundraising means, that we're re-examining our philosophies and our practices and how we've been doing fundraising so far. We've had to change the conversations. We've had some challenging conversations over the last year, recognizing that, we've been complicit in many instances and perpetuating problems we are trying to solve. So it includes wrestling with the fact that our current development model, fundraising model, is a form of white moderation designed to help white people feel good about themselves, right? And so we are really going to have to do some evolutionary thinking and change our practices as we think about fundraising.
Okay.
So, we want to set the tone that 60% of fundraising is cultivation, right? We know in order for us to disrupt philanthropy, we need to build relationships, particularly with individuals of color. And we know that one size does not fit all. We must shift our fundraising channels in our messaging and in our language and even the way that we govern. And we must also look at who's asking for the funds. And that's why I asked you about whether or not you had people of color on your fundraising team, because we know that this is who most fundraisers look like. Most fundraisers are 70% female and 82% of them are white, and less than 10% of them are people of color. The average age of a fundraiser is 42. Some fundraisers, many of them, I've probably said some fundraisers suffer from white saviorism, and they have been complicit and silent and inactive in making sure that there's equity in our fundraising practices. Yvonne, what about you? What comes to mind when you see this picture?
That the people who always need the money are of color, and the
Right,
people who have it are white.
right, exactly. So there's some bias in this, and that hand that's reaching out for the money is brown. So we assume that people who need help and people who need money are only Black people or only people of color, which is not true. And then the second thing, look at the white hands, Yvonne. What do you see when you see the white hands?
They they're giving the money, but they're like, don't touch me. That's kind of what it
No, they're
looks
not actually giving the money, Yvonne.
like.
Look at the hands again.
It's all trapped in the jar, and they're throwing it away.
Yeah, you see the one hand at the top has a hand up like stop. It's not even open. You see that? You see the brown hand, the palm is open and up. The white hand at the top, the hand
More
is
like
up
stop.
and is facing up like stop. And then the other hand, the money is going down, not handed to the brown hand, but
Right.
falling to the ground.
Okay.
Right? And then what about that jar, Yvonne?
It's very full and
It's very
closed.
full and very what?
And closed.
And closed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even an open jar. So we're going to be very discerning about when we open that jar and who we give it to and whether we give it to you at all.
Yeah, and
And
someone mentioned gatekeeping. I don't think I read it out.
yes, I wrote gatekeeping down. So you did say that because I wrote down the names that everyone
Okay.
said.
Good.
Yeah, no, and I think this imagery is really important because for all the reasons that we said, we assume that the person who's always asking for help are people of color, and that the people who give it are brown or white. And then we're assuming that they give it, right? They're not throwing the money away, or they're not putting their hand up saying we're not going to give it to you. And then we're assuming that the jar will be open and not closed. So there's a lot of things come to mind as we think about changing level setting and changing our mindset about what equity in fundraising looks like. So I want to talk a little bit about this because community-centric fundraising is fairly new. I want to say it's come on the scene in the last, maybe 5 or 7 years, maybe, would you say, Yvonne?
Yeah, I would say.
Vule, who is just a remarkable fundraiser, an advocate, an ally, came up with this philosophy of community-centered fundraising, and saying basically that we have been complicit in this fundraising thing. And he says, thank God, he and some of the folks who subscribe to this philosophy, he says, thank God we have begun to own our own complicity and power, choosing to be bold and challenging established norms. We have recognized that the way we do fundraising may be furthering the injustice that we are really trying to fight. And centering the comfort of donors, most of whom are white, we perpetuate white saviorism, poverty tourism, and inequity while allowing our donors to avoid confronting difficult realizations like the fact that wealth is built on the colonization, slavery, and other forms of injustice. And in order for our sector to achieve its mission of creating the world we want, we must ground our fundraising practices in equity, anti-racism, and racial and economic justice. So that's a mouthful But it really is kind of summarizes the values and the philosophy of Voulet and those folks who have subscribed to community-centered fundraising. What do you think about it, Yvonne?
It makes sense, and just even talking about like asset and abundance and that kind of thing, that those thinking of communities in different ways has been
Yes.
a conversation as well, and I see that all tying together.
Yes, yes, yes. So ways that we can start adding equity to our fundraising office. And we talked a little bit about what the average fundraiser looks like. We know that the fundraisers are predominantly white, predominantly female, in their early to mid 40s. And we're saying now, if you really want to add equity to your fundraising office, you need to hire fundraisers of color and then pay them fairly. I know at least one instance when I was working in the field where I was paid a much lower rate than one of my counterparts. We need to understand the identities of our stakeholders, including our board members, our volunteers, and our donors. We need to listen more and pitch less, which is, I think, something I learned early in my fundraising career. Because you go meet with a donor, you're so excited, you want to share everything that you know, and we really need to do more listening than talking. Learning the giving habits and motivations of our donors of color, aligning forge value and align authentic ways to engage with them, and then understand the wealth gaps and how they impact exclusion. So the sad truth, Yvonne, and it still exists today, is that the typical white family still has 8 times the amount of wealth as a typical Black family and 5 times the wealth of a typical Hispanic family. And so we know that impacts people's ability to donate. But I do want to say that there are some myths, as I shared earlier, that people of color are only recipients of charity and not givers to charity, right? And so we know that generosity persists across diverse households, and we do need to dispel the myth that generosity only exists in one type of donor. So neither race nor economic status impacts one's generosity or interest in philanthropy. In fact, this old chart that I found, this one was from 2016. I couldn't find one that's more recent. So if anyone has one, feel free to put it in the chat. But this chart here shows charitable giving as a share of median family wealth. So one of the things that people are saying is that fundraising is failing people of color. As I mentioned, organized philanthropy has not really done a great job of engaging non-white communities, right? We know that people of color, African American and Hispanic donors, say that if they would just ask more, they would give more. And Hallie Lee, who did a study on high net worth donors, says you cannot raise money from those you don't see, right? And so if you have folks in your database who are people of color and you're not recognizing them and stewarding them and cultivating relationships with them, then no, they're not going to engage with you. And if you have people in your community and you're not asking them because your perception is that they only receive and they don't give, then you're missing tapped opportunities. You're missing opportunities to tap into those communities and to raise more funds from people who obviously are benevolent, from people who obviously care, but you have to see them first, right? And so that's one of the things that I tell my boards when I'm working on my boards, is that we have to engage our communities such that we're inviting people of color and people who are from those communities to be in leadership roles on our boards, on our staff, so that we can begin centering equity with in an anti-racist fundraising culture. So if you're going to do this, you need to adopt a new strategic plan, or at least start incorporate in your strategic plan that you have now. Maybe add some things that says you're going to intentionally be anti-racist. And in the first year, you can have the board and staff work closely to redefine what milestones and success could look like. Your goals should take on qualitative aspects, and your organization's values should be apparent across all of your programs. And just know that when you start doing this, you may lose some folks that have been longtime supporters who may disagree with your new strategic priorities. And that's okay, though, because you're going to find that when you start doing this, you're going to breathe new life and get new and exciting donors involved with your organization. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about boards, but I thought you wanted me to really focus on fundraising, Yvonne, because you have said that in the past people are saying, I thought we were talking about fundraising, so that's really what I've been
No, no,
trying.
no. Today we're talking about engaging your boards around this fundraising. So
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
people want to
yeah,
concentrate on.
we'll talk a little bit about that in just a little bit, but I'm trying to set it up and talk a little bit about fundraising, motivations for giving for people of color, and then we're going to talk about how we train our boards to actually do some of this work. Okay,
And
so
would you say, Crystal, that we can use a lot of what you're saying to talk to the boards and show them these slides and these statistics and different things?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so some of the motivations for giving for donors of color. We know that faith, someone asked earlier, is because of charity. Absolutely. Faith giving is linked closely with religious beliefs and traditions. We know that for people of color, they see philanthropy as an economic weapon to fight against racial oppression, right? And because they feel like they're excluded from mainstream, often they form their own communities or own groups. I mean, that's why you'll see giving circles have become such a big success for a lot of nonprofits, because there folks will get together with their own, and they just create a method for them to give collectively. And they feel that this levels a playing field. Many want to provide better pathways to success for their communities, including younger generations, particularly in terms of education. So again, we know that channels for giving for donors of color are through small groups, often personal connections, giving circles, online platforms and crowdfunding campaigns. And we know that donors also are real big, color are big about giving money at the counter, at the checkout counter, when you ask them to round up, uh, they will do that. And we just need to deepen our awareness and engagement of the changing ethnic identities of people, because, well, right now, used to just be, black, white, Hispanic, but, there are a lot of biracial and cross-racial individuals in our societies now. There are a lot of folks, we lump people together and we say Latinos or Hispanics as if they're all one group, and we know that they're not. And so we just really need to do a better job of knowing who's in our database and how to best work with them. So one of the things I want to share is that donors of color live in cross-class families and communities, which means you might have a donor who's very wealthy, who's done well for him or herself, but they have family members who are not, who are may have not finished high school or maybe blue collar. So I just wanted you to know that a lot of them give some monies that they have earned. They feel responsible to give their monies back to their community and back to their family members, which may impact the amount of dollars they're able to give to you. And so I would definitely keep that in mind as you're beginning to build relationships with them. So now I want to just jump in a little bit and talk a little bit about the different donor groups. So we know that if you're cultivating Latinx donors, and again, we know that Latinx is a broad term, because that could be, it could be Mexican, it could be Guatemalan, it could be Cuban, it could be Puerto Rican. But there are 50 million people who identify as Hispanic or Latinx in our country right now, and projected to be 106 million by 2050. So quite a few people, and yet they're one of the most neglected groups, which accounts for their lack of participation in conventional fundraising. They're underrepresented on boards, only representing about 3.5%. And we know that 63% of Spanish-speaking households gave in 2015. So they're very benevolent, but we know that a large portion of their giving is reserved for giving back to their families in their homeland, and they do tend to give to Hispanic American organizations. So yeah, there's just some things that you should know if you have Latinx folks in your community and you've not done a great job of cultivating them or reaching out. These are some statistics you might want to keep in mind as you begin building relationships with them. Getting to know African American donors, again, 48% reporting incomes lower than $50,000, yet they gave $11 billion. They give about $11 billion per year. Again, they like to give at the checkout counter. They give because of their faith, and many give because of the trusting relationship they have with the person who's asking, right? 1 in 5 say that they would give more if they would just ask more. Asian donors, mostly female, college educated. Many of them have graduate degrees, some of them tech savvy. And they like to research before they give. They don't just give impulsively. They want to do a little planning and research. They seem to navigate towards emergency relief, children's organizations, and health organizations, and they self-organize to support one another. And they're motivated to donate to causes that can stimulate a broader conversation on racial inequality. And that was something that I didn't know. Sharing about high net worth donors of color. Most are first generation wealth creators. They have experienced racism. They grew up in cultures where giving was shaped by their approach to money. Excuse me. They are betwixt and between, straddling multiple social, cultural, and economic spheres, as I just mentioned. And they're not regular participants in philanthropic or political networks, but belong to civic and professional networks. So if you're wondering how to find them, they're not going to be just kind of out there. You're going to have to really do some real searching to find them. So building trust with donors of color means you're really reassuring them that you understand their lived experiences, that you're finding allies to give you some credibility when you're going out to meet with them, showing up where they are, church, sporting goods, radio stations. And, always bring up, goodness. Oh, I just had a brain fart. What's the name of the organization where Marlo Thomas's dad started the organization, Yvonne?
I do not know.
the hospital for the children who have cancer.
Oh my God! Now you're doing it to me.
Oh my God.
Oh gosh.
St. Jude's. Oh goodness, I had a brain fart. St. Jude's does a really great job of building relationships with the Latino community. They've gone to their churches. They've gone to their grocery stores. They have radio advertisements in Spanish. They have really jumped in to make sure they're in the same places where the Latinos are. So they have raised billions of dollars from the Latino community.
And just so you know, our captioner and the audience are all saying St. Jude. Thank you.
I'm sorry, y'all. I had a brain fart. I couldn't figure it out. And when you're building trust with donors of color, invite them into your world. Invite them to come and tour the shelter, show them how their funds are being invested, and then recognize them. Giving them credit for their gifts, and then keeping them in the loop after the event is over or the gift is received. So now we're going to shift a little bit and talk about boards. I know that's what you've all been waiting for, but I wanted to give some context around fundraising and where we are and how to change your lens.
Yeah, and I think, Christal, all of the context is something you can share with your board. So it's not, information that isn't relevant. So I'd say share it with your board and have this conversation with your board.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my mantra is who's at the top matters, Yvonne. And so I really have embraced this philosophy of equity in the center, and they have come up with an approach to building a race equity culture called Awake to Woke to Work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But I want to share that what we found is that when boards, particularly foundation boards, have become more diverse, we start seeing changes in systems, right? So those funders with boards who have comprised of at least 25% of people of color, they have changed the way that they do business. They've changed their grant applications to reach more nonprofits serving communities affected by systemic inequities. Right? They are really directing more funds to organizations that are serving people of color, POC. They plan to increase funding to organizations that serve Asians, Blacks, and Latinos, and undocumented immigrants once the pandemic is contained. They're making efforts to support women and Native Americans. They're tracking demographics of the community they support. They can track whether an organization is led by a person of color, and they're tracking the demographic information of your board and your staff, so that we know that when we diversify our boards, and particularly at the foundation level, the folks who are actually giving the money away, system change happens. And so that's just, to me, a sign that if we continue to diversify our boards, our nonprofit boards, which I'm hoping will have happened in the last 2 or 3 years since the pandemic. More people of color, more younger people having different voices on our board will now help us to start changing the dynamic of board work and maybe addressing some of the inequities that we have seen. Excuse me. A lot of folks don't like the word woke because it's been politicized. But being woke just means that you're aware and knowledgeable about the community and the world, and that you have a willingness to access and critique systems of oppression. It should not be viewed or seen as political or militant or anything like that. It's just that you have an acknowledgement that you are aware of what's going on in our community and that some things need to change, and you're willing to actively participate. So woke leaders, if you guys will let me say woke leaders and boards, they know that donors of color have available cash to give. They know that they are generous. They know that they are plentiful and not impossible to find. And they know that they're not homogeneous. They are also conscious of the fact that there are stereotypes. They are conscious of how they tell the stories. They are conscious of how clients are portrayed in stories. And they're really thoughtful about the images and the languages that are being used in the marketing collateral. And so hopefully, as we continue to start seeing some changes at the top in our board structure, we're going to start seeing that some of these changes will take place. So in their model, Yvonne, this Awake to Woke to Work model that I like, they've created this cog here, this round cog with all of these levers on the periphery of the cog, with all of the different demographic groups, stakeholder groups for your organization. And in order for this cog to move so that there's race equity in your organization, each one of these groups have to push the lever, their own lever, so that that cog will continue to move. And so if the senior leaders stop pushing their cog, the cog will stop. If the board of directors stop pushing their cog, the cog will stop. If the senior managers, so on and on and on. So in order for this cog to move, everybody plays a role in making sure there's race equity in your organization. And so what we want to talk today about is boards and how boards can do that. So one way, excuse me, one way they can do that is, in the awake stage, they can add a goal in their strategic plan, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, adjust your strategic plan to engage and increase donors of color in your database. So if you don't have any in your database right now, how can we begin attracting donors of color into the life of our organization? Are we serving people of color in our community? Do we have people of color in our community that we don't have relationships with? Like, I'll give you an example. Believe it or not, I worked for Susan G. Komen here in Atlanta a few years ago, and was really quite surprised to find that we didn't have many donors of color, particularly women, in our database. And I said to the executive director, how could that be? How could it be that here in Atlanta, and we know that Black women experience some of the most aggressive kinds of breast cancer, how could they not be in the database? And she just kind of looked at me, kind of like giving me like one of these looks like, I have no idea. I guess we've never really honed in on it. And I thought, this is a tragedy. And so I immediately got to work, Yvonne, and reached out to some folks here in the community who I knew personally, who were survivors of breast cancer or who were related to survivors. We got Monica Kaufman, who is a big anchor woman here. She's retired now, but she was a big anchor woman here in Atlanta. And through my network, I was able to get in touch with her and ask her if she would chair a new campaign for Black women to support Susan G. Komen.
Yep, that's Atlanta. Yep.
Yes, and as a result of that, we created this group, and our goal was to not only ourselves give to Susan G. Komen, but to increase the number of donors in our database that look like us. Then in the woke stage, you might want to create some kind of committee or task force, even though I know we're all over the task force, right? But you want to make it as diverse as possible. This is a way to get your board involved, board, volunteer, and staff, to partner with your development team to make sure that together you're creating a pipeline of diverse donors, and then create a stewardship plan to keep them engaged. And so that's kind of how you move from being awake to woke. In the awake stage, we're just increasing the numbers. In the woke stage, we're starting to plan, we're putting a committee together. And then in the work stage, we are now have concrete and intentional efforts are being made to reach donors of color by reaching back out to Black churches, civic groups, fraternities. We're actually doing the work. We're stewarding them. They're writing thank you notes. So we're moving from awake to woke to work. And this is how your board can be participatory in creating change, race equity change in your organization. And then, of course, as you teach your board to fundraise, you want to make sure that they're prepared, right? We can't assume that board members know what to do when it comes to fundraising. We know that many of them are trepidated by the idea of asking people for money. And so in order for us to successfully work with them, we have to equip them. And that means we have to, on the inside of the organization, give them the tools they need. And we can start off with lots of things. We can start off with talking points, right? Points of pride that they can use when they're out giving their elevated speech to people, or when they're in the grocery store and they bump into someone and they say, you know, what's going on? I heard you're on the board of that organization. Tell me a little bit about that organization. You have 3 or 4 bullets that everyone is saying, and you can figure out what that looks like. I just made up some bullets here, Yvonne. You could say, you know, we have 44 homeless shelters in the state, or because of the love and financial support of our donors, our children are more likely to find a safe and permanent home, or we have 2,600 volunteers who change the life of domestic violence, or a wise investment in our organization creates 1 year of advocacy costs for less than 1 month of foster care. So just have some points of pride that you can share with your board. And it could be 2 or 3 big bullets. It doesn't have to be a list of 10 or 12. 3 things that you want your board to be able to share with people when they ask you who your organization is and why it's worthy of support. One of the things we also want to do is that we want to share compelling stories with our board, right? So my question to you on the in the room here today, do you feel like you're doing a good job of centering Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, that's BIPOC, in your stories and asking them what they want the world to know about them? And so if you have these folks in your community, are you asking them first how they want their stories told? And the reason why this is important is that, you know, I have a personal example, Yvonne, where I worked at a homeless shelter, and we used to do tours of our shelter. And while we were doing our tours, we would always tell stories about the folks that were living in our shelter. And I remember one day after doing a tour, and I had, you know, we had our stories that had been written for us, right? We were told what to say. I was stopped in the hallway by one of our residents, and she said, you know, I've heard you all talk about us, you know, when you're giving these tours, but no one's ever really asked me personally about my story and what I want people to know about me. And it kind of threw me, it caught me off guard. And I thought, oh my God, she is so right. For us to presume to know, not, you know, I've never been homeless. I'm sure the executive director of the shelter had never been homeless. And so for us to feel like we can write up stories without asking and censoring those people in the stories themselves was our way of causing more harm. And so as you think about stories that you want to share with your board, it doesn't have to be, you know, people get all uptight about, we don't know what to share. Listen, I just made this one up on a whim. And so listen to this story that I created, Yvonne. It says, our client, John, found himself and his 16-year-old son, Glenn, homeless and living in their car. Right? He lost his job and his wife from a terrible car accident. Stricken with grief and depression, he turned to friends who sheltered them for a while, but soon had nowhere to go. After moving into our clean and safe family shelter, he was assigned a case manager who worked with him through his grief. And they discussed faith and healthy habits and spending quality time with his son, Glenn. He was also given job training. And after 6 months in our program, John landed a full-time position and found an apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Now, today, a year later, he has been promoted as a director at his job. His son, Glenn, is on the honor roll, and John is now saving to buy a house. I serve on the board of an organization that believes that giving people the wraparound services that they need to become stable and successful is the best way to pour back into communities and save lives. Please help to support more families like John and Glenn. So I gave that example because sometimes people think there has to be something long. And I mean, something just like this, I made this up I used to work at a homeless shelter. So I used to write, you know, for it. But they're just stories that we can give our board members that they can share with their friends or family with pictures, you know, with consent of their clients, This is a stock picture I got off the internet. This is not a real father and dad, but I just made this story up. But I wanted to just give this as an example of the ways that you can share stories with your clients. The other thing that you must do with your boards, rather, the other thing that you must do with your boards before they can fundraise is that you have to really help them change their mindset about fundraising. We know that boards, as I mentioned, are scared to ask people for money. For lots of reasons. They're scared because of their own relationship with money and their own perceptions about what's going on in our economy and with the recession. They're scared because they feel like people are going to reject them. And then they're scared because they don't have the information. They don't know the mission. You'd be surprised, Yvonne, how many board members are real not clear about the mission of the organization they're actually serving. They have an inkling, but they don't know for sure. And if you question me on this, I dare you to impromptu ask your board members to go around the room and share what the mission of the organization is. And you're going to get a lot of different versions and iterations of that mission, some of which go astray. And you're like, oh my God, that is not what we do. So you want to make sure that before your board starts asking for money, that you train them. You change their language and the mindset so that they don't feel like asking for money is trespassing on people. You know, you have to go into it, as I mentioned earlier, boldly, believing in the mission of the organization, believing in the purpose of the organization, and changing your mindset. And you know, fundraising is yes or no questions, Yvonne. So once you've done all the cultivation, the final question is, will you make a donation of whatever amount to our organization? They're either going to say yes or they're going to say no. And if they say no, no laws are broken. You might have to start all over and maybe go at it in a different angle and really start cultivating the relationship a little bit more, but really changing the mindset, giving them those success stories, and then do some role play, practice and role plays. If you have a board member who says, you know, I have a guy who I play golf with, we're playing golf tonight at 4:00, and I was thinking about asking him to make a donation for our Giving Tuesday campaign. And I'm a little scared about what I should say. I'm not sure how I should go about it. Practice with him and do some different role playing, and then again, provide those tools and techniques. And so wondering how boards can ask individuals, because we talked about individuals as being the biggest source of funding for nonprofits, right? So I tell them, listen, we should care more than we fear. Care more about what's happening with your organization than the fear that you might feel about asking, and get the tools that you need. So get your organization's case for support, making sure that they have the case for support so that we know why the organization is worthy of our support, why donors should care, right? If your board's going to ask for the individuals, they should, go to a quiet place where they can talk one-on-one, maybe on the golf course. Definitely not in a noisy restaurant. Definitely not while you're eating a big plate of spaghetti that could spill all over your shirt. Or in my case, coffee that I spill on my shirt once the waiter bumps the table. And I got coffee all over the front of my blouse. I'm trying to clean coffee off while I'm talking. You definitely don't want to do that, right, Yvonne? You need to know how much you need to know what your organization needs and how much. And you could present the ask as an opportunity. We have an opportunity to increase the number of children we serve this year. And, with a donation, a legacy gift or a meaningful donation from you, we'll be able to do We're asking you to make a meaningful gift in the amount of $50,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is, and then be quiet and let that person respond, and then give them a plan B so that if they get a no, it's not awkward. The board member could just say, okay, I hear you. What I'd like to do is to keep you in the loop what's going on with our organization, maybe connect you with our development person inside the office. We'd like to add you to our mailing list. And listen, they're going to have a gala at the end of the year. Maybe you could be a guest at my table, right? So you want to leave on a friendly note and keep the conversation open so that even though you got a no this time, it means a no for now and not a no forever. And so this is something that we learn as fundraisers. Those of us who are fundraisers in the room, we know all of this, but we do need to tell this to our boards if we're going to have them making ask for us, right? They have to be prepared, right? And excuse me, we know that peer-to-peer fundraising is huge, right? And so it has gotten even more huge since the pandemic, right? And so it's really successful in that we have other people, board members and friends and supporters asking on our behalf. We know that peer-to-peer is a form of crowdfunding, and we can cast a wider net where more people hear about our organization that we may have in our database. It helps to increase personal buy-in, and it could be easy and fun. So this is something you definitely want to talk to your board members about. Excuse me. We know that Giving Tuesday is coming up really quickly. And there are things that you can do to help your board. So, you want to make sure that if you have a campaign prepared, that you tell your board about it weeks in advance. They should already know about it. We're at November, 10th? And Giving Tuesday is November 29th. So hopefully your campaign is already set. You already have it out there for people who want to give early, but your board should know about it. So you want to share those stories, share those videos, provide the language that you want them to use in the post that they're going to create on social media so that every board member is saying the same thing. Ask them to identify some people in their phone or in their network. Ask them literally to pull out their phones and identify 10 people in their contact list that they could share the campaign with, right? And then encourage them to be the first to actually participate in the campaign. Even if they've already made their donation, they can make a stretch gift and give an additional $100 on Giving Tuesday, and then share that they made this stretch gift with their friends and colleagues, and then ask them to also join them in giving to this campaign. So there's some ways that you can get your boards involved in Giving Tuesday. And then, Yvonne, this is a donor care plan that I created when I was still a fundraiser. And I tried to make sure that every month of the year that some stakeholder in my database was being touched. And then I knew the strategy on why I was touching them, whether or not it was a stewardship touch, whether or not it was an impact touch, whether or not it was an ask, right? And then I incorporated who would be responsible for doing these actions. And so this is a way for us now to put our board members in some of these places. And so we know that for a Thankathon, for instance, when you're calling and thanking donors for their support, the who on this donor plan could be your board, right? Or if you're writing thank you notes, you can add your board on this donor plan as the who will write the notes from the board, right? Excuse me. Or if you're doing a gala and you're trying to sell tickets at the table, you're inviting each board members to buy a table. That could be the who in this donor care. But every month, the donors and the stakeholders in your database are being touched in some way, whether it's a social media post, whether it's an email, whether it's a phone call. And not every time are we making an ask, right? Every time we're reaching out, it's not an ask, it's for different things. But you can plug your board member into this care plan so that your board members have some things to do in between board meetings, right? Because we often hear from board members, we don't know what to do. I came to the board meeting last month. I signed off on all the reports. I stamped yes or no. And then I don't hear anything from the organization. I don't know how I can get involved. I don't know what else I can do to support them with fundraising. I'm giving you some ideas here with a donor care plan that you can plug your board into and give them, take some of this off your plate, Yvonne. Those of us who were one-person shops would welcome the support of your board members to do some of these things to help you as you're trying to steward your donors. 60% of fundraising is cultivation, 60%. So we want to make sure that we give our boards an opportunity to fundraise. And if you have not at this juncture given your board the quick fundraising 101 toolkit where they have the case for support, the annual report, the fundraising plan, the campaign goal, how to make an ask, the compelling story, the compelling videos. Now is the time of year to say, I'm going to give you all of these tools to make sure they're at your disposal. We're going to practice our one-on-one. We're going to be cognizant that the donors in our database have different motivations for giving. We know that for people of color, the person who's making the ask of them is really important. So if everybody on your team are white women in their age, in their 40s, and you have Black folks in your database who are in their 60s, you need to find an ally, a volunteer, or someone who can go out with that development person and give that person some credibility when they're making the ask. So these are just some things that we can do to get our boards more engaged. more enlightened about fundraising with an equity lens. And then once we do all the work, we want to thank and thank and thank and thank. We can give our boards an opportunity to take a big picture like this and then post it on social media. This is a big thank you from the board of directors of our organization who are saying thank you for supporting our organization. And so by expanding our scope of who our donors are and our relationships with them, and by prioritizing our authentic relationships with them, folks different than you maybe, you can expand your networks and your organization to be reflective of the communities that you serve and envision a new kind of philanthropist and the world. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. And I wanted to just end by sharing a few resources here. I do have an e-workbook that talks about how to work with your board to create a race equity culture. I have a training that I'm going to be doing, Not Your Grandma's Nonprofit Board, New Trends for 2023. And if you're interested in booking me to come in and talk to your board in 2023, here's my website and my email. And Yvonne, I want to just stop now. I think we still have a few moments. If there are any questions or comments or feedbacks, if there are any aha moments that people got, you learned something that maybe you didn't know, please put it in the chat. I would love, love, love to hear from you.
Yes, it is Q&A time, so we're about to ask some questions. Don't do anything. Leave that on the screen, okay? I'm going to change stuff. I have to tell Christal stuff because she's just going rogue today. Okay, so the first question, okay, I'm sorry. I have to find my questions. Wendy said, would love to have 3 questions that will make the board think more intentionally beyond grabbing funds on the importance of engaging donors of color.
Tell Wendy to email me. I don't need time to think about that.
Yeah, well, you know what? Also, Wendy, there was so much that Christal was saying really fast in the presentation that I think you could probably get that from, because I'm kind of thinking back on what you were talking about, Christal, and you gave so much good information that I think, Wendy could email you, yes, but there was a lot in there. I just think it might be a little more digestible after, and we
Yes.
are sending that out. And you can also get it right now by downloading it, and we also have a link that Ebony put in the chat at probably earlier, and she can do it again so that you can get that.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, so I think your slides are really useful because they're talking to fundraisers, but we're saying our boards are fundraisers. So if we could take that information and give it to them, I think that'll work. Okay, let me see what else we got, and I'm gonna change over also to my slides. But one thing I wanted to mention, Christal, you were talking about engaging your board in the donor care plan, which I love. And one reason I think it really works these days is because we're talking a lot about having fundraiser boards that look different. So
Right.
you might think, oh, well, my board can't do a social media post or a TikTok. But yeah, maybe they can because maybe your board member is now a millennial or
Right.
a Gen Zer or something. And if you're diversifying your board in that way, you might be surprised at the talents and things that you have among your board. So just keep
Right.
that in mind. Jasmine says, I have a hard time because our executive director does not like to ask individuals for money. So it is hard to get our board engaged in fundraising. Any
Ooh.
suggestions?
Your executive director doesn't like to ask individuals for money. I think probably sharing the statistics with him or her that most charitable donations are coming in from individuals. And by not asking, you're missing a whole big population of folks who would support you if asked. And share the statistics that, corporate giving is mostly in kind. Grants giving is mostly family foundations. And most giving that comes in for nonprofits is from individuals. They will stay with you, as I shared during the pandemic. They will stay with you, and even if the gifts are small, they will continue to give. They are your most loyal stakeholders. Foundations and corporations on a dime will change. And I'll give you an example. I was working with Publix, the supermarket Publix, who was giving our organization a 4-quarter allotment. And in the last quarter, a couple of years back, they had a big hurricane or something in Florida where Publix is headquartered. And they very kindly called me and just said, oh, yeah, by the way, I know we said we were going to give you a certain amount of money for the fourth quarter, but because of the hurricanes in Florida and because we're headquartered in Florida, we're going to take some of your money that we had promised you, and we're going to give it to the people in Florida, which we certainly understood because people were standing on their roofs, right, because of the water and the horrible weather conditions there, and people were needing help. But they had made a commitment to us that we had planned on, and they just very quickly said, well, we got to send our money to Florida. My bad. So I just want you to know, not relying on corporations and foundations as your sole source of funding. You have to diversify your funding, and you need to put a lot of energy into individuals. And that is something you need to re-emphasize with your executive director. And I'm happy to talk to him or her if you want me to. So again, my email is right here, hello@theboardpro.com.
Thank you. Diana wants to know, do POCs or people of color tend to give exclusively to organizations run by other people of color? Are there any studies? Do you know?
I don't know. I want to say that we definitely want to support, particularly now. I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, with everything that's been going on, there's been a lot of emphasis on supporting people of color and who lead organizations, and primarily because, first of all, they don't have the same resources. Their boards are less likely to make donations themselves and less likely to fundraise. In addition to the fact that they usually have smaller staffs and therefore smaller budgets, and they just don't have the resources. And so I think here lately, after the George Floyd thing, a lot of folks have been encouraging people to support organizations led, I know I do, led by people of color. So I don't know the statistics offhand, but I would guess in the last 2 or 3 years, you've probably seen a huge bump in support of those organizations. And as I mentioned earlier, those foundations that have diversified their boards are now looking to support organizations led by people of color. So I imagine you're going to see some huge change in that way in the last 2 or 3 years.
Erin wants to know, if most of your donor base is white folks, how do you navigate conquering the fear of asking when apparently whites are less giving? For instance, we have a kind of celebrity involved with our org that has very rich friends, but he is very reluctant to ask his fellow white rich people for money. Any thoughts there?
He's a person of color, or he's
He
also
is
white?
white. He is white. Yeah.
Okay, and he's reluctant to ask other white folks for funds.
Rich white folks.
Oh, um, um, I would just say, of course, you can't force anyone to do anything, but I think you have to be, just like when you cultivating any major donor, you have to be strategic. I mean, you would have to sit down with this donor and talk about each of those individuals, and figure out a strategy, the best strategy to reach out to them, to share your organization's mission, and to get them involved. I mean, the first thing he has to do is he has to be willing to do it, and not assuming that everybody, because they all have money, need to be cultivated the same way. And so if you have 4 or 5 names, sit down with this donor and talk about each one of those individuals. Okay, for John, we know that his wife is excited about ABC, and I know if we approach him this way, this might get him to give. And for Sandy, she and her husband give to a lot of organizations like this. And so for her, this special program might be the way to get her involved. And then so for each one of those individuals, sit down and come up with a strategy on how you're going to make this huge ask of these very wealthy people. And you have to do so by knowing a little bit about them, their stories, their interests, their passions, and create a strategic plan to actually get them engaged. It's not one blanket ask.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then we have Renata, maybe. Our board wants to bring more diversity to the board and to our fundraising team. We are a working board and our fundraisers are all volunteers. But we are having difficulty finding people of color to join our board. Where can we find the people we're looking for? We provide long-term transitional housing for women and children experiencing homelessness. Yeah, I know this is a question you get a lot.
Yes, it is. And so first of all, I would ask, I don't know what city or state this person is in, but when I do search for organizations, I do board search, and it's not necessarily here in Atlanta, which means I have to reach across the state lines, Yvonne, and do my research to find people of color in those states. And so one of the things I suggest is definitely, well, first starting with your board members. So seeing if your board members have any folks in their networks in their sphere of influence who are people of color. Whether it be, you know, in your child's class or on your child's basketball team or somebody you go to church with or who you work out at the gym, really trying to dig deep and figure out if you have folks. And then if not, then you want to start looking outwards, right? You want to look at the community organizations that are in the surroundings of your organization. So you want to start looking at, you know, Black fraternities and sororities. You want to look at churches, whether they be, you know, Korean churches or Hispanic churches. I have actually, you know, called some pastors when I'm doing search and asking if I can let them put the announcement in the bulletin board or announce it during Sunday service. Like, you know, so I've actually asked pastors, Black pastors, to do that. There are some organizations like, it used to be, oh God, there's BoardNet, and then it used to be Impact, I think it's called Impact USA. It used to have a different name. I send out announcements on Work for Good. I send out announcements through Indeed. I do some cold calling on LinkedIn. I tap fraternities and sororities. I call the Black Chamber of Commerce. I call the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I look at civic groups in that community. Yeah, it takes a lot of legwork, which is why a lot of folks will hire folks like me, because they don't have people who have the time and the bandwidth to actually do the legwork to find the right individuals. Because we're not only just talking about people who are brown because they're brown. We're talking about people who are qualified to be on your board. They just happen to be brown, right? And so we still have to make sure that we complete the board matrix, and we're making sure that we're getting the right skill sets that we need, the right industries represented, and the right people on your board. And then if you could find people who are people of color to fill those slots, you want to make sure all of that is in place so you're not tokenizing people.
Thank you, Christal. And I'll keep that in mind. Shannon wanted to know, are there any good examples of board kits you can link us to?
I mean, you can tap BoardSource and Boardable. I mean, those are some of the, you know, bigger sources. You know, unfortunately, mine are not free. So a board kit comes, you know, with my clients when they hire me to work with their boards. They get a board kit. So if you're interested in working with me, you can check me out on my website there. And if you want to get the free resources online, you can go to BoardSource or Boardable.
Thank you. Lula says, when we use the same fundraising approach for white people as we do with Black people, they don't donate. Should we have a different approach with white people?
Well, yeah, I mean, that with white people or with people of color?
She's saying when they use what they do with people of color with white people, it doesn't work. So I guess either way.
Yeah, no, actually, that's exactly the point that I was trying to make, that you do have to take into consideration that when you're talking to people of color, the way that you approach them and the things that you talk about are different. We know that faith is a huge part of why people of color give. And so I would definitely talk about that a little bit. We know that they give because they want to give back to their own communities, right? We know that they give because their pastor asked them to give and their son's basketball coach asked them to give. You know, we know that they give because they really feel like they have a role in making sure that they uplift their own communities. They want to make sure their own communities are taken care of, and they feel an obligation. People of color are communal. They're not individualistic, which is part of white supremacy culture, individualistic, whereas people of color are more communal. They're more interested in giving back to my brother or to my sister. And so you want to talk to them in that, using those kinds of, that kind of language, because that's what's going to resonate with them. So by going back and looking at those slides that I shared with you about what their motivations of giving are, then you want to make sure that you adjust and change how you approach them based on the information on those slides.
Thank you. And Suzanne said, I like the little book of boards, good for super small nonprofits. It's not a kit, but it's helpful. So I think maybe Ebony grabbed that. Maybe she's going to put it somewhere. And another question that we had, you had mentioned before, I think Diana maybe misinterpreted this. If it's insensitive to ask for funds during a recession, is it an isn't it insensitive for white people to ask Black people for money? But you said it wasn't insensitive, that we should ask, don't assume.
No,
Um,
absolutely.
right. So I just wanted to clarify that, because, but would it be a little strange for white people to ask Black people for money? Would that be perceived in any particular kind of way, you think?
No, and I just said that because people of color don't trust white people, that it makes sense if you're going to ask a person of color that if you don't have anyone on your fundraising team, that you find an ally, a volunteer, or someone else who's a person of color who you can take with you. I mean, you just got to know who's going to make that gift happen. Whether it's a person of color or not. I remember when I was working on the inside, when I would go meet with a pastor, for instance, to ask a church to make a donation, I took a male with me because I know from many pastors, they resonate more with men. They don't like women in the pulpit. They don't like women asking. So I knew that I needed to take a man with me to make an ask of a pastor. So you just have to know that if you're going to ask a person of color, in some cases, I'm not saying in all cases, that you'd sometimes taking a person of color with you on that visit, even to just give you some credibility, could go further. And that doesn't mean that if you're a white person, you can't ask a Black person and be successful. Absolutely. But just know you better go in authentic. You're going to have to build trust with that person. You need to speak the language that person that resonates with that person. If this person is about his family or about giving back to his community, use that and leverage that when you're having conversation with them. So I'm not saying it's impossible for you to. I'm just saying just go in mindful of different things that will help you get further along with that donor.
Thank you. Yeah, I think treating donors as people, and just,
Yes.
trying to figure those things out is important, because I know, Christal, you've mentioned before feeling sometimes tokenized when they say, "Oh, it's the Black person, you have to talk to them."
Yes.
So, yeah, I think if everyone just thinks about, well, who is the person and what
Right.
do we need to do to talk to this person, then that should be really helpful. Christal, thank you. You kept me on my toes today. I'm very sweaty, but I appreciate you coming in always. And I just want to remind everyone, thank you all for your time. And so everyone have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Christal.